The winter wind in Brookmont had teeth. It bit through the seams of coats and slithered under doors, but it was especially merciless against thin cotton and worn-out shoes. On the corner of Maple and 6th, in front of the glossy glass facade of Argent Tower, an old black woman hugged her faded army green coat tighter around her shoulders and stamped her feet to keep the blood moving. Her name was Mabel Carter, though most people never asked. To the hurried office workers, she was that lady by the revolving doors, the one with the shopping cart piled high with bags, the dented thermos, and the cardboard sign that used to say anything helps before the marker faded. Mabel shifted her weight, joints aching. Her left knee had been bad since the bus accident 15 years ago. The doctors had called it reduced mobility. Mabel called it trouble getting up when you've fallen down. She blew warm breath into her cupped hands and glanced at the sky. Snow again, probably. The clouds were thick and low, pressing the city into a muted gray hush. The streets reflected a smear of brake lights and pedestrian signals. Everything wet from a thin drizzle that couldn't decide if it wanted to be rain or ice. An office worker in a navy coat strode past, talking into earbuds, and dropped a crumpled dollar into Mabel's empty paper cup without breaking stride. "Thank you, baby," Mabel called after them, her voice cracked but still surprisingly warm. "Bless your heart." The person didn't turn around. They almost never did. Mabel wasn't bitter. At least, that's what she told herself. Bitterness was heavy, and she already carried enough. The weight of her years, the weight of her memories, the weight of every no she'd been told when she applied for jobs, for apartments, for help. But there were still small lights in her days. The security guard, Luis, who sometimes slipped her a coffee. The barista from the cafe across the street who occasionally passed her a bag of pastries. That just happened to be extra. Even the pigeons who clustered around her cart, like she was a queen on a throne of plastic bags and recyclables. That morning, though, it wasn't the pigeons or Luis or even the prospect of half-stale croissants that made something in Mabel's day crackle with possibility. It was the wallet. It happened the way most important things do. Suddenly, and in a moment everyone else was too busy to notice. The lobby of Argent Tower was a sea of movement. People surged through the revolving doors, faces lit faintly blue from their phones. The marble floor was slick with melted snow. A cleaning crew had placed yellow caution signs everywhere, but the streaming crowd weaved around them without looking down. Inside the doors, a cluster of cameras flashed white. A small group of reporters had gathered near the security turnstiles, murmuring among themselves. A tall man in a charcoal overcoat stood with his assistant, flanked by 3 members of his security team. He had a square jaw, close-cropped salt and pepper hair, and the relaxed posture of someone used to being the center of a room. This was Victor Hale, Billionaire, founder and CEO of Hale Dynamics, the company whose name crowned Argent Tower in mirrored letters 30 stories up. To the world, he was a story of grit and genius, a kid from a working-class neighborhood who'd become a titan of tech and finance. To the employees glancing at him over their badges and coffee cups, he was just the boss, the man whose decisions affected their promotions, their projects, their stock options. He was here for the big announcement. Everyone knew that. Rumors had been swirling for weeks. Outside, Mabel was focused on a different rumor, that the cafe might throw out soup around 11 if it didn't sell. She watched people pour in and out through the revolving doors. With the drizzle picking up, the glass turned cloudy where warm air met the cold. She shuffled closer, partly for warmth, partly because she liked watching the way people's expressions changed between outside and in. Faces tensed against the cold relaxed into distracted frowns once they stepped inside. That was when she saw it. The wallet flew out of the man's coat as if it had wings. He was tall, wearing that charcoal overcoat with the collar turned up. As he stepped into the revolving door, he reached into his pocket, maybe for his phone, maybe for his ID card, and his wallet slipped free, knocked loose by the edge of the glass. It tumbled end over end and hit the ground just outside the door, landing in a shallow puddle. He didn't notice. The revolving door spun, the man turning with it, and in a heartbeat he was inside, shaking off the cold and striding toward the cameras. People flowed behind him. The door spun again. If anyone saw the wallet, They didn't care. Mabel did. For a moment, she just stared at it. The wallet was sleek and black, the kind of leather that whispered expensive, even from a distance. It looked heavy, like it had never known what it was to be empty. Her first thought, if she was honest, wasn't noble. It was simple and raw. That could change everything. Her fingers twitched. Rent for months. Enough to fix her knee. Enough to get a room. Any room, even if it was tiny with a window that faced a brick wall. Enough to get off these streets and stop waking up with frost in her eyelashes. No one was looking at her. Everyone's attention was pulled toward the commotion in the lobby. Flashbulbs, microphones, the tall man in the charcoal coat. The wallet sat in the puddle, dark against the gray sidewalk, close enough that all she had to do was step forward and pick it up and slip it under her coat. Mabel's heart thudded once hard. Then, slowly, she let out a breath. Her mama's voice rose up from somewhere behind her left ear, as clear as if she were standing there with her hands on her hips. You know better, May. We don't keep what isn't ours. We don't let the world decide who we are. Mabel muttered, I hear you, Mama, under her breath. She glanced again at the door. The man in the charcoal coat was farther inside now, shaking hands with someone in a navy suit. A reporter adjusted her microphone, face shining under the lobby lights. Lord, Mabel said softly, if this is some kind of test, it's a cruel one. The winter wind gusted, flipping the corner of her cardboard sign. The wallet just lay there, waiting. Mabel reached out, her fingers stiff with cold, and picked it up. The leather was cold and wet. Mabel turned the wallet over in her hands. It wasn't just expensive, it was heavy with something more than cash. When she opened it, she had to squint to see through the drizzle. There were cards, so many cards. A metal credit card with a matte finish. A black card with a silver chip. A driver's license with a photo of the man in the charcoal coat. The man she now knew as Victor R. Hale. The eyes in the photo were serious, almost softer than the real man's. The address made her whistle under her breath. One of those penthouse-level numbers in a neighborhood where the doormen wore suits and the dogs had their own groomers. Behind the IDs, there were neatly folded bills. Hundreds. Not just a few, but a small stack, held together with a slim money clip. Just seeing them made her chest tighten. Mercy, she whispered. Her stomach growled, a hollow ache. She could feel the frostbitten nights, the humiliation of being shooed from store entrances, the pain in her knee that flared every time she lay on the concrete. All of it pressed against her like a hand between her shoulder blades, urging her to just close the wallet and walk away in the opposite direction. But Mama, stubborn even years after she'd passed, wouldn't be quiet. We ain't thieves, May, that remembered voice scolded. Not now, not ever. We poor, but that's not the same thing. With a rough sigh, Mabel closed the wallet and clutched it in both hands. Fine, she grumbled to the empty street. All right, I hear you. She pushed open the door to Argent Tower. Warm air hit her face, carrying the smell of polished wood, espresso, and expensive perfume. The marble floors gleamed, slick with the tracks of wet shoes. A Christmas tree, too early in November for some people, but not for corporations, stood in the corner, dripping ornaments in gold and white. Heads turned as she stepped inside. Mabel was used to looks. The glance and away, the squint of disapproval, the quick assessment of her oversized coat, her scuffed sneakers, her gray hair tucked under a knit cap that had seen better days. But being stared at by 20, 30 people at once was something else entirely. The reporters paused mid-sentence. A cameraman lowered his lens. A receptionist blinked. The security guard behind the desk, a tall man with a buzz cut, reacted first. He rounded the desk, one hand already out like a crossing guard. Ma'am, you can't. I ain't here to cause trouble, Mabel said quickly, lifting both hands, the wallet held up like an offering. Somebody dropped this. The man in the fancy coat went through that spinny door. Her voice carried more than she intended. The lobby quieted. Even the hum of conversation from the mezzanine above dipped, replaced by a hush of curiosity. The security guard's eyes went to the wallet. His expression shifted, confusion briefly giving way to surprise. He reached out carefully. Mabel hesitated. I want to make sure it gets back to him, she said. Direct like. The man in the charcoal overcoat, Victor Hale, though she didn't know his name yet, had turned at the commotion. His assistant, a younger woman with sharp cheekbones and a tablet in hand, was already nudging him. "Mr. Hale," she murmured. "Looks like something's happening." Victor's gaze flicked from the reporters to the old woman in the worn coat, holding up his wallet like a sacred object. For a moment he just stared, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. Then he walked over. In the crowd of tailored suits and glossy shoes, Mabel felt like a crumpled receipt blown in by accident. She straightened as much as her bad knee allowed. Up close, Victor looked exactly like his photos, and not at all like them. The camera captured the clean lines of his jaw, the expensive haircut, the perfectly knotted tie. Standing a few feet from her, Mabel saw the things cameras missed. The faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the scar just under his chin, the brief flash of exhaustion that crossed his face before he smoothed it away. "Is that?" he began, and his assistant leaned in to murmur, "Your wallet, sir." "Oh," he blinked. "My wallet?" Mabel held it out. "It fell out your pocket when you went through that spinny door." She jerked her chin toward the revolving door. "I picked it up before the puddle soaked it too bad." The crowd watched, silent. A reporter's camera light glowed softly, recording every moment. Victor took the wallet. His fingers brushed Mabel's, and he frowned slightly, not in disgust, exactly, but in surprise at the contact. His gaze went briefly to the name badge hanging from the security guard's shirt, then back to Mabel's eyes. "You could have kept it," he said, sounding genuinely curious. "There's quite a bit of cash in here." Mabel snorted. "I noticed." He waited, eyebrows raised, as if expecting a joke. Mabel met his gaze squarely. "Because it ain't mine," she said simply. "Besides, I got a mama watching me from upstairs. She don't play about things like that." A few people chuckled nervously. The tension in the lobby shifted from wary to something else. Victor glanced down at the wallet again, then at the stack of reporters pretending not to hang on every word. He'd had cameras on him for decades. He knew how this moment would play. The billionaire and the homeless woman. The moral of the story write-ups. The social media clips. He'd been about to make a different kind of announcement today. A grand one. A new initiative. A restructuring. A move that would change the company's future. But as he looked at the woman in front of him, her coat frayed at the sleeves, her shoes splitting near the toes, clutching herself against the lobby's chilled air like she wasn't sure she should even be there, something in his chest stirred. A memory of his mother scraping together coins for rent. The feeling of his own stomach growling as a boy. The sound of his uncle's voice saying, "Just because you're broke doesn't mean you're broken, kid." "Thank you," he said quietly, too quietly for the cameras. Then louder, "What's your name?" Mabel hesitated. Most people didn't ask. "Mabel," she said. "Mabel Carter." He nodded. "Miss Carter, you've just done me a great kindness." She shrugged, uncomfortable under the attention. "Just doing what's right." Victor slipped the wallet into his inside pocket, where it should have been in the first place. He could have left it at that. He could have pulled out a few bills, pressed them into her hand, maybe asked someone to give her a sandwich and send her back outside. That's what the crowd expected. That's what the cameras, already framing the shot of rich man tips poor woman, were prepared for. Instead, Victor turned toward the reporters. "Don't go anywhere, Ms. Carter," he said. "In fact, would you mind coming upstairs for a minute?" The crowd murmured. Mabel's eyes widened. "Upstairs," she echoed. "Now, I don't want to cause no trouble. No trouble," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "You've done exactly the opposite." He waved over the head of the crowd. "Luis, right?" The security guard blinked in surprise. "Yes, sir. Can you escort Ms. Carter to the 29th floor, Conference Hall A? And please make sure she's comfortable." Luis nodded, his posture shifting subtly. "Yes, Mr. Hale." Mabel clutched her shopping cart handle by instinct. "I can't bring my things, can I?" she asked, half to herself. Luis glanced at Victor, uncertain. Victor looked at the cart, piled with bags, a blanket, a plastic crate of odds and ends, and then at Mabel's face. "We'll keep an eye on it," he said. "It'll be here when you get back. I give you my word." That word meant something in this building. It meant millions of dollars in contracts and careers. To Mabel, it was just a man's promise. but something in his voice made her fingers loosen on the cart handle. "Okay," she said slowly. "Okay then." As Luis led her toward the bank of elevators, the reporters erupted. "Mr. Hale, Victor, is this part of your announcement? Who is she?" Victor raised his hands in a calm, practiced gesture. "We'll start in 10 minutes upstairs," he called. "You'll hear everything there." Behind him, an assistant hurried to adjust schedules, whispering into a headset. The lobby buzzed like a beehive. Outside, snowflakes began to fall. The 29th floor of Argent Tower usually hosted quarterly earnings calls and product launches. Today, it hosted something no one had anticipated. Mabel stepped out of the elevator and into a world of glass and gleaming chrome. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city spread out below, the river a dull silver ribbon under the cloudy sky. Rows of chairs faced a stage with Hale Dynamics logo projected behind a sleek podium. "Right this way, Ms. Carter," Luis said, his voice softer now that they were away from the lobby crowd. "I ain't never been this high up in a building," Mabel whispered, half to herself. Her ears popped. "Feels like I'm in a fancy fish tank." Luis smiled. "Big day for that view, too," he said. "You picked one heck of a morning to pick up a wallet." Mabel chuckled nervously. "Trust me, baby, I don't pick what falls in front of me. I just try not to trip over it." A woman with a headset and a clipboard spotted them and darted over. "Ms. Carter," she said. "That's me. I'm Jenna. I handle events. Mr. Hale asked that you have a seat on stage, next to him." Mabel blinked. On the stage?" "That's right." Jenna hesitated. "We have some refreshments, too. Coffee, tea, pastries." At the word pastries, Mabel's stomach clenched. She hadn't eaten since a half-bagel someone had tossed her way the previous afternoon. "I could use a coffee," she said quietly. "If it ain't too much trouble." "No trouble at all." Jenna signaled someone across the room, who hurried to a side table. Minutes later, Mabel was sitting in a plush chair at the edge of the stage, a steaming paper cup of coffee warming her hands and a plate with a croissant on her lap. The buttery smell made her eyes sting. She tore off a small piece, almost reverently, and put it in her mouth. It melted on her tongue. For a moment, she closed her eyes. "Okay, Mama," she murmured softly. "You were right. You usually are." By the time she finished the croissant, the room had filled. Reporters with notepads, bloggers with tablets, camera crews setting up tripods at the back. Employees slipped in along the sides, trying to look like they weren't just here to see what on earth was going on. Whispers rippled through the room. Some people pointed discreetly at the stage, where Mabel sat, her coat still wrapped around her, her worn sneakers planted firmly on the polished floor. Who is she? Maybe a beneficiary of some program? Publicity stunt, probably. Victor entered from a side door, flanked by his executive team. The low murmur in the room swelled. He gave the crowd a practice smile before turning to Mabel. "Ms. Carter," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "How are you holding up?" She let out a nervous laugh. "I done been colder and hungrier than I am right now, so I can't complain." He smiled at that, a real smile, not the one he used for cameras. "Thank you for coming up. Wasn't like y'all gave me much of a choice," she said wryly, then immediately regretted it. "I mean, thank you, sir, for the coffee and all." "You're welcome." He paused, then added, "And just call me Victor." "Victor," she repeated, tasting the name. He stepped up to the podium. The room settled. Lights shifted. Microphones angled. "Good morning," he began. His voice filled the conference hall, calm and resonant. "Thank you all for coming. Today was supposed to be about numbers and strategy. Quarterly reports, forecasts, that sort of thing. And we'll get to that. But something happened downstairs a few minutes ago that changed the order of things." Camera lights flicked on, red tally lights glowing. Victor gestured to the side of the stage. "This is Ms. Mabel Carter." Dozens of heads turned toward her. Mabel felt the weight of 100 eyes and tried very hard not to shrink into her coat. "This morning," Victor continued, "as I was coming into the building, I made a mistake. I dropped my wallet. I didn't notice. I walked inside, ready to talk about profits and projections, completely unaware that the thing that holds my IDs, my credit cards, a frankly foolish amount of cash, a ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, was lying on the sidewalk outside. He held up his wallet for the cameras to see. Ms. Carter saw it fall. She could have picked it up and walked away. No one would have known. No cameras were on her. No security guard saw. Given the amount of cash in here, that would have been a very understandable choice. He paused, letting the silence stretch. Instead, she brought it inside, asked for me by description, and insisted that it be returned directly to make sure it reached its owner. He turned back toward Mabel. Miss Carter, you knew there was money in here. Why did you bring it back? Mabel's mouth went dry. She hadn't realized he'd ask her anything. For a second, the room blurred. Cameras, faces, the city beyond the windows. Then she heard her mama's voice again, and it steadied her. She cleared her throat. Like I told you downstairs, she said, her voice carrying more strongly than she expected. It ain't mine. My mama always said, we don't take what ain't ours, no matter how much we need it. You keep small wrongs, you make a home out of bigger ones. I ain't trying to live that way. The room was quiet. Even the rustle of notepads paused. Victor nodded slowly, his expression sober. Ms. Carter lives on the streets outside this building, he said to the crowd. She has every reason to be angry at people like me, at companies like this one, at a world that can leave someone who does everything right still sleeping on concrete in 30-degree weather. A flicker of discomfort moved through some of the executives on the side. In my wallet, Victor continued, I had more cash than Ms. Carter has seen in one place in a long time, and she didn't take a single bill. He let that sit there heavy. A few weeks ago, I made a very different decision, he said. I sat in a boardroom with my team. We looked at spreadsheets, market forecasts. We talked about efficiency, shareholder value. We decided to shutter a division that wasn't meeting our internal metrics. That decision saved the company money. It also cost 312 people their jobs. Several reporters began to scribble more furiously. We offered severance packages. We had outplacement services. We did what was industry standard. And I told myself that was enough, that the math made sense. He shook his head. But watching Ms. Carter this morning, it hit me. Somewhere in that group of 312 were people like her. People who didn't have a safety net. People whose lives might spiral from one job loss in ways I've been privileged enough to forget. He took a breath, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its polished sheen. I started Hale Dynamics in a garage with a second-hand computer and a head full of ideas. I know what it is to wonder how you'll pay rent. I know what it is to choose between groceries and medicine. But over time, success can insulate you. You start to see numbers instead of lives. He glanced back at Mabel, then at the cameras. Ms. Carter reminded me, in the simplest, clearest way, that integrity doesn't depend on your bank account. That doing the right thing when no one is watching is worth more than any quarterly report. Someone in the back murmured, wow, under their breath. So, Victor said, and his tone shifted, a note of resolve entering it. Here's what we're going to do. The room leaned in. First, he said, turning fully toward Mabel, Ms. Carter, I owe you more than a thank you. Not as charity, but as recognition of the value you've given me this morning. He motioned to an assistant, who stepped forward with a folder. I've asked our legal department to draw up documents. We'll go over them in detail with you and anyone you trust to advise you. But in simple terms, I'm establishing a housing trust in your name. It will purchase you an apartment, modest but comfortable, fully furnished, in a building not far from here. The trust will cover your rent, utilities, and basic needs for the rest of your life. There was a collective gasp. Mabel stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. My own place? She whispered. Yes, Victor said. Your own place. Your name on the lease. Your key. Your bed. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. She blinked hard, not wanting them to fall in front of all these strangers. But one slipped free anyway, carving a line down her weathered cheek. That's too much, she stammered. I just brought back what was yours. Victor shook his head lightly. You reminded me of what's mine, he said. My responsibility. My humanity. That's worth far more than what this will cost. He turned back to the crowd. But that's not all. If the room had been buzzing before, now it was electric. Second, he said, we're launching the Carter Initiative, named after Ms. Carter here. It will be a company-wide program dedicated to supporting our most vulnerable neighbors. We're committing 10% of my personal annual bonus, a camera zoomed in at that, not company funds, mine, to create a fund for transitional housing, job training, and mental health services for people experiencing homelessness in this city. The room erupted into a storm of camera flashes. We're partnering with existing organizations who've been doing this work for years, quietly and effectively. Our employees will have paid volunteer days to participate. Our cafeterias will redirect surplus food to shelters instead of wasting it. Our real estate team will identify underused properties we can convert into temporary housing. On the side, a senior VP looked like he'd just swallowed a lemon. A younger manager looked like she might start cheering. We'll also run an internal audit, Victor continued, his voice hardening just slightly, to ensure that none of our business practices contribute, directly or indirectly, to evictions, predatory lending, or other mechanisms that push people out of stable housing. A low murmur swept through the audience. This was bigger than a feel-good gesture. This was systemic. And third, Victor said, we're offering jobs. He turned to Jenna. How many open entry-level positions do we have across the company right now? Security, facilities, cafeteria, shipping, customer service? Jenna rapidly consulted her tablet. Across all locations in the city? Around 127, sir. Victor nodded. We'll reserve at least 50 of those for candidates referred through our partner organizations working with people experiencing homelessness. We'll provide paid training, mentoring, and support to help those new hires succeed. And we'll keep expanding if it works, which I believe it will. He looked back at Mabel. Ms. Carter, you said downstairs that your mama wouldn't let you keep what wasn't yours. My mama was the same way. He stepped away from the podium and approached her chair. The cameras tracked every step. When I was a kid, he said softly, but the microphones picked it up, we almost ended up where you are now. We were one missed rent check away. If our neighbor hadn't stepped in, we would have been on the street. That man's kindness changed my life. I've paid it back in some ways, but not like this. He knelt slightly beside her, so he wasn't towering over her. I can't fix everything, he said. I can't undo all the hurt in the world. But I can change your situation, and I can use my position to make this company part of the solution instead of part of the problem. Will you let me do that? Will you let me help you get off that corner permanently and put your name on something bigger than a cardboard sign? The crowd held its breath. Mabel looked at him, really looked at him. At the billionaire kneeling beside a homeless woman on a corporate stage. At the cameras hungry for a narrative. At the employees whose faces sped through a cycle of skepticism, hope, and awe. She could say no, a small, stubborn part of her whispered. She could reject what might be a stunt. She could cling to the only life she knew, rough and familiar as it was. But then she thought of the nights when the wind cut through her blanket like it was paper. Of the time she woke with her hands so stiff from cold she could barely close them around her cup. Of the ache in her chest when she passed families laughing inside warm apartments, Christmas lights glowing in the windows. She thought of Mama and the way she'd once dreamed of a little house with a porch before life had taken that dream and scattered it like dry leaves. Her voice, when it came, was a trembling whisper amplified by the mic. I will, she said. I'll let you. Victor smiled, and it was like something in the room relaxed. He stood and extended his hand. Mabel, wiping quickly at her eyes, put her smaller, weathered hand in his. The cameras flashed so brightly it felt like standing in a storm of white. The press conference did not go the way anyone had planned. The financial reporters, who'd come prepared to dissect earnings and ask hard questions about profit margins, found themselves asking about housing policy and corporate ethics instead. Mr. Hale, critics will say this is a publicity move. Why only 10% of your bonus? How will you measure success for the Carter Initiative? Victor answered steadily. This isn't philanthropy as a side project, he said. This is about how we do business. If we operate in a city where people freeze to death outside our doors while we discuss stock buybacks inside, then we've failed at something deeper than quarterly targets. He shared numbers, yes, but different ones. Statistics on homelessness in the city, on mental health services access, on recidivism rates when stable housing was provided. He cited studies that showed how every dollar invested in prevention saved multiple dollars in emergency services. And as for 10%, he added to one pointed question, that's where we're starting. I fully expect that number to grow as we see the impact. And I encourage other executives watching this to look at their own compensation packages and ask themselves what portion they can't morally keep. On the stage, Mabel listened, bewildered and moved in equal measure. She didn't understand half the jargon, but she understood the intent. Every time he said, Carter Initiative, her heart gave a little lurch. Was he really naming this thing after her? Between questions, during a break, a young reporter with curly hair approached her. Ms. Carter, she said, kneeling so they were eye level. May I ask you a few questions for our viewers? I suppose you already asking one, Mabel said, a wry smile tugging at her mouth. Might as well make it official. The reporter grinned. How long have you been homeless? On and off for, Lord, years blur together, Mabel said, counting in her head. About 7 years since I last had a place that was mine. My husband passed, medical bills piled up, then I lost my job when my knee went bad. After that, it's like you sliding down a hill with no brakes. What kept you going? The reporter asked gently. Stubbornness, Mabel said immediately, and faith. And people, a kind word here and there, a sandwich, a hot drink. She glanced at the coffee cup still in her hand, and this old voice in my head telling me, you ain't done yet, girl. And when you saw the wallet? The reporter prompted. Mabel chuckled, shaking her head. I thought, Lord, this is a temptation if I ever saw one. But like I said, Mama raised me better. You can't build a new life on somebody else's loss. That's a house that'll fall down quick. The reporter's eyes glistened. How do you feel about everything Mr. Hale is promising? Scared, Mabel said honestly, and hopeful, and confused, and proud. Not what I did. I was just doing right. Proud that maybe my little choice might mean other folks let me get a shot too. The reporter nodded, swallowing hard. Thank you, Miss Carter. I think a lot of people at home needed to hear that. Later, as staff began to usher people out, Jenna approached Mabel with a stack of papers and a woman in a smart blazer. Ms. Carter, this is Alicia from our legal team, Jenna said. She's going to go over some of the details with you in private. And we can bring in an advocate from one of our partner organizations to make sure you have someone on your side who understands all this legal language. Mabel's head spun. That'd be good, she said. I ain't signed nothing more complicated than a shelter check-in sheet in a long time. We'll also take you to see the apartment options this afternoon. If you're up for it, Alicia said, her tone warm. We have a few places in mind. Places, Mabel repeated, dazed. Plural. Places, Alicia confirmed with a smile. Before they let her out, Victor caught up to her again. Ms. Carter, he said, I know this is a lot. If at any point you feel overwhelmed. She laughed softly. Baby, I've been overwhelmed since the 80s. I'll be all right. Just don't forget, once these cameras go away, once folks move on to the next story, don't you forget what you said up there. He held her gaze. I won't, he said. In fact, I'd like you to help me not forget. She raised an eyebrow. How's that? I'd like you to meet with me regularly, he said. Once you're settled, not as a prop, but as a consultant of sorts, to tell me, in this company, when we're getting it wrong, when our policies don't match reality on the street. You want me to scold you? She asked, half amused. If necessary, he said. You've already done more for my conscience in one morning than most people have in years. She eyed him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, Victor. I'll tell you the truth when you don't want to hear it. You sure you want that? He smiled. I think I need that. The story spread faster than the snowstorm rolling in over the city. By afternoon, clips of the press conference were trending. People watched the moment the frail, coat-wrapped woman and the billionaire clasped hands on stages across the country. They shared it with captions about kindness, justice, and the power of doing the right thing when no one's watching. In living rooms and on commuter trains, people argued about it. Of course he can do that. He's a billionaire, some scoffed. He should have been doing it already. At least he's doing something, others countered. Most of them don't do even that much. Is this just a PR move? Skeptics asked. Maybe, others said. But if people get homes and jobs out of it, does it matter? In a small, crowded shelter on the other side of the river, a woman with tired eyes watched the video on an old TV mounted high in a corner. When she saw Mabel's face, she slapped her knee. "That's Mabel," she cried. "You remember her? She used to sleep 3 cots down from me last winter." A murmur rippled through the room. Heads tilted up to see the TV better. "Go on, Mabel," someone whispered as the old woman on screen said, "You can't build new life on somebody else's loss." At the cafe across from Argent Tower, the barista who'd been slipping Mabel pastries watched the clip on his phone between customers. His eyes widened when he recognized her. "Well, I'll be," he muttered, a smile breaking over his face. She did it. He grabbed a marker and wrote "Carter's Special" on a chalkboard, underlining it twice. Beneath, he listed a discounted coffee and pastry combo with a note: "Proceeds go to local shelters." Inside Argent Tower, not everyone was immediately enthusiastic. In a glass-walled office, a senior executive paced. "He just announced this without running the numbers," she fumed. "Do you know what this will do to our margins?" Another, younger manager sat on the edge of his desk. "Do you know what it'll do for our reputation?" he countered. "For our recruitment?" "That's not the point," she snapped. "Isn't it?" he replied. "Maybe the point is we stop talking about people like they're line items today." Down in the mailroom, 2 employees leaned over a shared phone screen. "Look at Ms. Carter," one said. "She's always out front. I didn't even know her name until now. I gave her a coffee once," the other said thoughtfully. "Felt good for 5 minutes, and then I forgot about it." Meanwhile, she's up there changing the company. In corners and break rooms, a quiet shift started. The Carter Initiative wasn't just a program. It was a mirror. Some people didn't like what they saw. Others were relieved to finally see something different. 2 days later, the snow lay thick on the sidewalks, muffling the city's usual roar. Argent Tower's lobby was quieter than usual, the buzz of the press conference replaced by the more ordinary hum of daily business. Outside, the corner by the revolving doors looked strangely empty. The dented thermos was gone. The cardboard sign was gone. The shopping cart, piled with bags, was gone. Instead, on the other side of town, in a small but bright apartment on the 3rd floor of a red brick building, Mabel stood in the doorway of her very own kitchen. Her very own kitchen. She still couldn't quite believe it. The apartment was simple. 1 bedroom, a bathroom with tiles that weren't cracked, a living room with a small sofa and a bookshelf, and this kitchen with its white cabinets and humming refrigerator. But to Mabel it might as well have been a castle. "They put food in the fridge," she said in awe, opening the door for the 5th time in an hour. "Real food, not just condiments." Alicia, perched on a stool at the counter, smiled. "We stocked a few basics to get you started," she said. "You can tell us what you prefer, and we'll adjust." "This is plenty," Mabel said quickly. "More than plenty." She opened a cabinet and saw plates neatly stacked, bowls nested. Another held cups and mugs. One mug had the Hale Dynamics logo on it. Another was plain blue. She picked that one up, running her thumb over its smooth surface. "How you doing?" came a voice from the doorway. Mabel turned. Victor leaned against the doorframe. No suit jacket today, just a soft sweater and slacks. He looked somehow younger outside the glare of the cameras. "Still think it's a dream?" Mabel said. "Half expect I'm going to wake up back on that corner with the pigeons laughing at me." Victor stepped into the apartment, looking around. "I remember my first apartment," he said. "The ceiling leaked. The oven didn't work. But it was mine. I slept on the floor the first night just to feel the difference." "Did you cry?" Mabel asked. "A little," he admitted. "Don't tell anyone." Mabel chuckled. "Your secret's safe with me, long as you keep mine." He tilted his head. "Which one?" "That I stood in this kitchen alone earlier and cried like a baby," she said. "Ugly cried. The kind with snot." Victor laughed, the sound bright. "That seems like a perfectly reasonable reaction." He walked over to the window and looked out at the street below. Kids were throwing snowballs in the small park across the way. An older couple walked arm in arm, bundled up against the cold. "Good view," he said. "Close to public transit. Grocery store on the corner. Not bad. Not bad." Mabel repeated, incredulous. "This is heaven on earth to me, boy." He smiled, accepting the correction. "To you," he agreed. "And that matters." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the world below. You know, Mabel said slowly, this ain't gonna fix everything. I know, Victor said. There's folks out there who won't get lucky enough to catch a billionaire's wallet, she continued. Folks whose lives are messier than you can see from that tower. Trauma, addiction, no family. It ain't as simple as giving them a key and a job. I know that too, he said. We're not gonna get all of it right. We'll make mistakes. We'll help some people less than we hope. But if we don't start, if we don't try, nothing changes at all. She nodded slowly. Long as you remember that it's people, not numbers. That's what got us here, isn't it? You forgot for a while. He winced a little, but didn't deny it. I did, he said. Thank you for reminding me. She studied him. Why'd you do it? She asked. Not the apartment. All of it. The initiative, the jobs. Was it really because of me? Or was this thing already cooking in your head? He hesitated, then answered honestly. Pieces of it were. We've been talking about corporate responsibility, sustainability, public image. We had proposals, committees, drafts of drafts. It all felt abstract, like a slide deck. Then you handed me that wallet. You, he gestured, made it real. You put a face to the people our decisions touch. He leaned his hands on the counter. There's also selfishness in it, he added quietly. I don't want to be the kind of man who walks past a problem every day and convinces himself it's someone else's job to fix it. I've done enough of that. This was me waking up a bit. Mabel folded her arms, considering. I can live with a little selfishness if it does some good, she said. Long as you don't use it as an excuse to pat yourself on the back while folks still sleeping on the grates. That's why I want you as my conscience, he replied. You don't seem like the type to let me off easy. You got that right, she said, a hint of pride in her voice. A knock sounded at the door. Jenna poked her head in. Sorry to interrupt, she said. We have the first meeting for the Carter Initiative Steering Committee in an hour. And Ms. Carter, if you're up for it, there's a community liaison who would love to introduce themselves. They have experience helping people transition from the streets to housing, and they'll be your point person. Mabel's eyes widened. I get my own point person? You get a whole team, Jenna said. Housing, healthcare, job counseling. That's too much, Mabel protested, overwhelmed. Jenna smiled gently. That's kind of the point, she said. For a long time, you've had too little. Think of this as a rebalancing. After she left, Victor looked at Mabel. You okay? I'm trying to be, she said honestly. Having help is almost as scary as not having it. At least with the street, I knew the rules. If any of this feels wrong, he said quietly, you tell us. We'll adjust. This shouldn't feel like charity being done to you. You're our partner in this, not our mascot. She tilted her head, studying him. You talk pretty, she said. He laughed. Occupational hazard. You better back it up with actions. I intend to, he said. In the weeks that followed, the story refused to fade. Other companies called Hale Dynamics, some publicly, some privately. They wanted to know how the Carter Initiative was structured, how they'd chosen partner organizations, how they were measuring impact. A few tried to copy the optics without the substance, hosting glamorous charity galas while still lobbying against affordable housing. Social media was merciless to them, comparing their gestures to Victor's more concrete commitments. But even Hale Dynamics stumbled. The first batch of job placements didn't all go smoothly. Some new hires struggled with the adjustment to structured office life after years on the street. A few quit. A few were let go. That was predictable, a cynical board member remarked at one meeting. Yes, Victor said, which means it was on us to prepare better. So we will. They partnered with more organizations. They brought in trainers who'd worked with marginalized communities before. They added mental health support and peer mentors. Slowly, the retention numbers improved. In the city, small ripples spread. An HR director at another firm saw the story and convinced her CEO to implement paid volunteer days. A landlord who'd been on the fence about accepting vouchers saw Mabel's interview and decided to give it a chance. A teacher showed the clip to her class and asked them what they would have done if they'd found that wallet. One boy in the back raised his hand. I'd give it back, he said, but I'd ask for a job. Smart, the teacher said. And if they said no, another student asked. Then I'd still give it back, the boy said after a pause. 'Cause if I kept it, I'd be lying to myself about who I am. The teacher wrote that on the board. As for Mabel, life on the third floor didn't turn into a fairy tale overnight. She had nightmares the first few weeks. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, certain that when she opened her eyes, she'd see the underside of a bridge or the gray ceiling of the shelter. Instead, she saw the soft glow of a nightlight, the silhouette of her dresser, the faint outline of curtains drawn over a real window. She'd lie there, listening to the heater hum, tears soaking her pillow, whispering, thank you, to anyone who might be listening. She had to relearn small things. How to pay an electric bill. Even if the trust covered it, she wanted to understand how to operate a thermostat, how to cook for one in a real kitchen. You'd think riding the bus was the same whether you got a home or not, she told her community liaison one day. But it feels different now. Less like you're wandering, more like you're going from somewhere to somewhere. She did not become a completely different person. She kept wearing her old coat, even when they bought her a new one. This one's seen things, she said, patting its sleeve. I'm not ditching it just yet. Once in a while, she'd walk back to Argent Tower, not out of necessity, but out of habit, and stand across the street, watching the people flow in and out. One morning, a passing worker did a double take. Ms. Carter, he asked tentatively. She smiled. In the flesh. You look good, he said awkwardly, taking in the cleaner clothes, the new hat. I feel good, she replied. Cold, but good. Do you still need? He gestured toward where her cardboard sign used to be. She shook her head. Not today, baby. Today I'm just visiting an old life to remind myself how far I've come. He nodded, relieved. It's good to see you, he said, and meant it. You too, she said. Don't forget to look up now. Life ain't all in that little screen. He laughed, glancing at his phone guiltily. Back upstairs, in Victor's corner office, the CEO watched her from behind the glass, a small smile on his face. He'd grown used to looking down and seeing her there. Now he saw her only sometimes, by choice, and that difference mattered more than he knew how to explain. At their check-in meetings, she didn't hold back. They had me fill out the same form 4 times at that clinic, she complained one afternoon, settling into a chair across from his desk. If you want folks who ain't used to paperwork to stick around, you gotta make it simpler. He took notes. Forms. Got it. And that job training video you showed me, she snorted. Y'all had some actor in a suit talking about leveraging synergy. Ain't nobody on the street gonna know what that means. You want to connect? You speak plain? Like you're doing with me now. He scribbled, plain language in big letters. You're right, he said. We get trapped in jargon. And don't you forget the folks who can't just walk into an office, she added. Mental illness, addiction, a lot of them ain't ready for a 9 to 5 yet. That don't mean you write them off. We're talking to partners about more flexible options, he said. Part-time roles, remote tasks, supportive environments. Good, she said. I want to see the day when someone like who I used to be can walk into any building in this city and not feel like they garbage. He looked at her, his expression earnest. So do I, he said. Months later, the city would remember that snowy morning at Argent Tower as the day when one small, simple act, an old woman picking up a wallet, set 1,000 other acts into motion. Some of those acts were public and grand, like ribbon cuttings at new transitional housing facilities and speeches by executives quoting statistics on homelessness. Others were quiet and almost invisible. A hiring manager giving a candidate with a gap-filled resume a second look instead of tossing it. A software engineer spending her paid volunteer day teaching computer skills at a shelter. A landlord deciding not to evict a family over a late rent payment after hearing about the Carter Initiative in the news. For Mabel, the most shocking part of it all wasn't the cameras or the apartment or having a program named after her. It was the first time she fell asleep and realized, with a jolt like a missing step, that she had not spent a single moment that day worrying about where she would sleep that night. The sheer absence of that fear was so strange it felt like a physical space in her chest, a room where something new could grow. On a clear spring afternoon, she stood on her small balcony, watching sunlight glint off the windows of Argent Tower in the distance. The air smelled like thawing earth and exhaust. Her phone, yes, she had a phone now, with a case adorned with tiny flowers, buzzed. A text from Victor popped up. Big TV station wants to do a follow-up segment on the Carter Initiative. Would you consider being interviewed again? She smiled, shaking her head. She typed back, her fingers slow but steady. Only if we talk more about them than about me. His reply came quickly. Deal. Come by tomorrow? She sent back a thumbs-up emoji, still delighted at how such a small symbol could carry so much. Leaning on the balcony railing, she thought about all that had happened since that cold day in front of the revolving doors. She thought about Mama, about integrity, about the long years when doing the right thing felt like it only made life harder. She thought about how, in the strangest way, that consistency had finally opened a door she hadn't even known existed. Funny, isn't it? She said out loud to the sky. You spend your whole life trying not to lose yourself, and then the world finally turns around and sees you. Below, a little girl on the sidewalk looked up and waved at the lady on the balcony. Mabel waved back, her smile wide. In that moment, she wasn't the homeless woman outside Argent Tower anymore. She was Mabel Carter, tenant advisor, namesake of an initiative changing lives one key at a time. And all because, on a cold winter morning when no one was watching, she picked up a stranger's wallet and decided to remain who she'd always been. Years later, people would still recount the story. They'd say, a homeless black old woman returned a billionaire's wallet. What he did next left the crowd in shock. Some would focus on the billionaire's gesture, the way he'd opened his wallet and his heart. Others would talk about corporate responsibility and systemic change. But those who knew the fuller story, who had seen Mabel in the years before and after, would lean in and say, yes, what he did was shocking. But what she did, what she had been doing all along, quietly, stubbornly choosing honesty when no one was looking, that's what made everything possible. And somewhere in a warm apartment with a well-worn coat hanging on a hook by the door, Mabel would sip her coffee, shake her head at the TV, and mutter, I didn't do nothing special. I just did right. The rest? That's on all of us.